Over 20 years ago, Advocare came to TAFE Mount Lawley, where I was an aged care student. Advocare talked about elder abuse and advocacy, and from that moment on, I knew that that's where I wanted to be. So you can understand how proud I am today to welcome you to Advocare's World Elder Abuse Awareness Day 2022 Ready to Listen community event. My name is Taryn and I'm an Advocare team leader. I'm just going to go through some housekeeping. So toilets are out this door and across the hall. Exits are up here and up here. There's an exit off to the left and an exit out to the front of the building. There is also an evacuation point at the train station. Can we just make sure that all phones are off and that everyone is wearing a mask in the building? We will have an option for Q&A. If you are at home on webinar, you can use the Q&A function. Otherwise, if you fill out your paperwork, we can put that in a box and go through some Q&A questions at the end. Also, at the end of the webinar, we'll be able to collate more questions and create a summary to put out via email to everybody. So now I'm going to hand you over to our presenters, Shawnee and Serena.
Thank you for that introduction, Taryn. My name's Shawnee and I'm an advocate at Advocare, and together with my colleague Serena, we will be bringing you the presentation Ready to Listen, Raising Community Awareness about Elder Abuse with a focus on sexual assault. Before we begin today's presentation, I would like to provide acknowledgement of country. So I, an Advocare, would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land we meet on today across WA. Here in Perth, I acknowledge the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. I acknowledge that the lands we meet on always have been and always will be Aboriginal land. I'd also like to speak about the content of today's session. I know everyone who has registered for today is aware of what we're talking about. However, our Ready to Listen community presentation contains information related to sexual assault and the impacts of trauma. So please note at any point if you find this information triggering or traumatising, confronting anyone here in the theaterette, please feel free to leave and rejoin when you can, or if you can. Anyone at home, please do the same. If you want to log off now and later see the recording, then that's perfectly fine as well. The session outline for today will be a few things, and we'll go into every single point here in more detail, starting off with Advocare, who we are and what we do, defining elder abuse, giving you an overview of what elder abuse is and the definition of elder abuse, speaking about the Ready to Listen project, talking about sexuality and sexual assault in older people, bringing you Margarita's story, talking about responses to assault in regards to trauma, and an important conversation around responding to assault and communities of recovery. So who Advocare is, for people who don't know who Advocare are, we are an independent community-based not-for-profit organisation that supports and protects the rights of older people in WA. We are the WA member for the Older Persons Advocacy Network. Advocare is funded to provide free, confidential advocacy and support to older people who are receiving or want to receive aged care services. And we also manage the Elder Abuse Helpline in WA, supporting those experiencing or at risk of abuse. One thing I'll add there is that the helpline is for everyone. Where possible, we like to speak to the person at risk of abuse or experiencing abuse, but it's for anyone to call to ask for general information or just have a chat about what their concerns might be for an older person. So who we help, this is the scope of our practice. If anyone is eligible for or receiving government-funded aged care services in residential or home care settings, people with legal decision-making capacity or legally appointed representatives of people without, and people who are being abused or at risk of elder abuse. When we say legal decision-making capacity, it means that because we are client-directed and we require consent, especially when advocacy is required for certain things, then that person must need to be able to make their own decisions. If in some circumstances they can't, then we will work with their enduring power of attorney or guardian to help them resolve any issues they might have. There are certain people under 65 who may be eligible for Commonwealth funded aged care services. A lot of people, if eligible for the NDIS, do receive services and support through them, but there's a few people that fall in the cracks. So for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, they can access aged care services from 50 years and above. And there's also a small cohort society that are classified as prematurely aged from 45 plus, and we can assist them if they require any aged care services. So I've touched on the information and how we can support people ringing Advocare about lots of things related to aged care. In regards to advocacy, we will assist a person if they identify a problem with their service provision, and we can either provide them information so they can self-advocate, or we can work with them and represent them should they provide the consent to hopefully get the outcome that they want. We provide a lot of community education and a lot of education to other external stakeholders, healthcare providers, residential aged care facilities, and events like we're doing today. We also have the CVS, which is the community connection. So we have the community visitor scheme, and I think at the moment we have about 130 volunteers that are specifically matched to people in the community and in residential aged care that are experiencing social isolation. There's a lot of people that want to be connected with other people than family and friends, and so that program has worked perfectly well in establishing that communication and that rapport with older people that are at risk of that social isolation. And as I touched on before, the Elder Abuse Helpline, providing free confidential information, support and referral. All of Advocare services are free. There's no charge cost to anything that we offer. So in June every year, there is a day called the World Elder Abuse Awareness Day. It does fall on the 15th of June, which happens to be today, but it's a day that we, and a week actually, we've had a whole week, and every year we do, to recognise exactly what happens in society. So it really does, we add day, we add week, but every day for Advocare, it serves as a call to action for individuals, organisations and communities to bring attention to the issue of elder abuse, neglect and exploitation of older people. So what do you think elder abuse is? Lots of people may understand the definition, know the definition. People might have a theory about what elder abuse actually is. Unfortunately, a lot of people have seen it or experienced it. But elder abuse is defined as, and this is from the World Health Organization in 2002, is a single or repeated act or lack of appropriate action occurring within any relationship where there is an expectation of trust which causes harm or distress to the older person. So the key thing there is that everyone knows what abuse is and how that can be perpetrated in many different ways, but it's also the lack of appropriate action, which is classified as neglect. That's not often talked about, but that's something that we see more and more often. And the latest statistics are that 1 in 20 older people in WA may be experiencing elder abuse from family or friends. That's based on some of the statistics we have, but we do know that elder abuse in all forms is underreported for many, many reasons. For us that work at Advocare and answer the WA Elder Abuse Helpline, we have a different definition. That was the World Health Organization's definition, but this is something that us as advocates have come up with. So it is a hidden scourge, a taboo subject that has the potential to cause great suffering to nearly a fifth of our nation's population. Elder abuse in all forms causes untold damage and silences the voices of older people. That basically is why we're here today, to raise the voices of older people. And if they can't raise their own voice, then we'll do that for them. And this is national statistics. Almost 1 in 6 older Australians reported experiencing elder abuse in the last 12 months. We're not seeing those numbers come through. So on the WA Elder Abuse Helpline, so that just goes to show how many people who are experiencing some type of elder abuse aren't actually reaching out for that support. Global research has shown the following. As I just alluded to there, only a small proportion of elder abuse is detected. That elder abuse is associated with significant increased risk and mortality, particularly when it comes to physical and sexual abuse. Elder abuse can lead to serious physical injuries and long-term psychological consequences. And we do know for certain that people with some form of decision-making disability were more likely to be subjected to abuse. So when calls come to Advocare, these are the 6 categories, although it's much more complex than 6 categories. These are the categories that we will define the abuse as. What I can tell you is that I don't think in the 3.5 years that I've worked at Advocare, I've ever received a call or a concerned person talking to me about elder abuse that only covered 1. It normally covers 2 to 3. And as you can see that graphic, psychological abuse underpins every single other type of abuse. So when we talk about social abuse, we talk about the older person not being allowed or being prevented to engage in activities or going to church or a day centre, a GP or a specialist appointment. They have their mail withheld from them. They have passcodes changed, emails and numbers blocked. Neglect is not providing someone with the care and services that they need, medication or continence aids or, food or heating. Financial, that takes lots of different forms. It can be as, I suppose, minor when I'm talking about the monetary value of, and it's never ever minor, but someone, a daughter, a son, a grandchild doing someone's shopping and thinking, well, I've been doing this for mum all the time, I'm just going to take $50. I'm going to just take this because there's that sense of entitlement. It can range from that, which still has a huge impact on the older person, to someone with an enduring power of attorney or some sort of legal representation transferring millions of dollars and property into someone's house, into their own names. We hear everything across the board about something that is quite complex and there's a lot of money involved, but any sort of abuse that is perpetrated does cause significant impact to the older person. Physical and sexual abuse we hear less of, and I think that there's lots of reasons for that. I think there is they are more of a taboo subject, but also when that is happening to older people, if they do want to report it, they actually see that as signs of abuse. If you have a physical injury or something has happened to you sexually, people know that that's criminal and they will report it to the police. The social neglect, the financial and the psychological abuse can be quite insidious. Sometimes it's happening for a long period of time and the older person doesn't actually understand what's happening until sometimes it's too late or it's been going on for years. Still, if supported, it's good for them to speak up if they feel safe to, but it's not often that we hear about sexual and physical abuse for those reasons, but they are all underreported, and particularly sexual abuse. And that's why we're here to talk about that today and debunk some myths and just open up the conversation. So these are the facts that we've had over the last 3 years. As I alluded to there is a few types of abuse that we hear more often: the financial and the psychological abuse, the social abuse, the neglect, the physical abuse, but sexual abuse is certainly something that we don't hear about often. And as I explained, it was there's a reason for that, because we know, given the research that we've done and the project that I will speak to in a minute called the ReadytoListen Project, that sexual abuse is occurring. It's occurring in residential aged care for older people and it's occurring in the community as well. Although a lot of people don't report it, there are stories about that. In the community, there is nowhere to, I suppose, apart from the police, if we're talking about older people receiving aged care services, there is no obligation for the community services or the home care providers to report that to the Aged Care Quality and Safety Commission. There is in residential aged care, and this is why the Ready to Listen project was established. I will go back actually, because what I wanted to say about that is just another acknowledgement about the topic that we're talking about. It can be uncomfortable and disturbing and quite traumatizing for some people. And now we're going to delve into the sexuality and sexual abuse of older people. We've wanted to make sure that this content was thought-provoking, but not too confronting. And I hope that we have done that justice, because it's a hard subject to talk about, but we've tried our best to make sure that we have trying to hit the mark. So to start off the conversation, what is sexual assault? So by definition, and there's lots of different definitions and lots of different terminology around sexual assault. But sexual assault is a type of sexual violence that involves any physical contact or intent of contact of a sexual nature against a person's will using physical force, intimidation, or coercion. That speaks to itself. So what is sexual assault? Forcing, threatening, or coercing an older person to engage in sexual acts, grooming, stalking, or making sexual threats, sexual innuendos, sexually explicit language, or showing pornographic material. I think that last point is something I want to highlight, because when people talk about sexual assault or sexual abuse or rape, they're thinking about what people technically, well, usually term that sort of assault as being. It's about making an older person or anyone feel uncomfortable, and that is speaking in a sexually graphic way or showing pornographic material. And a lot of people don't understand that that's actually considered a type of sexual assault, sexual abuse. What sexual assault is not is anything consensual. So consensual acts of affection or consensual sexual relations, gestures of comfort. When we talk about consent, and this is a divisive topic as well, but what I will say about consent is that there's a lot of people in law that have spoken about implied consent. But when we talk about consent in this context, we're talking about affirmative consent. So it is saying yes before any act of anything to do with a sexual nature. It is not implied, and consent isn't anything but someone saying yes to that person, because it has to be demonstrated that is it voluntary and active, and that person is entering into that engagement through their free will, free agreement. And gone are the days where the absence of no means yes. That's the point I want to make, because a lot of people still, unfortunately, have that mindset. And this is what we're trying to, I suppose, educate people on, that, you know, it has to be always affirmative consent. So before we start talking about the Ready to Listen project, which has now been, I think yesterday, the final resources were made final. It will now be rolled out to the residential aged care facilities for training for staff, and I'll go into what that project is. But just a little bit of a background before I start that, so you understand where the Ready to Listen project came from. So in October 2018, there was the Royal Commission into Aged Care Quality and Safety. Now, a bit of background on that was that in 2016, there was inquiries, and prior to that, into the Oakton Aged Care Facility in South Australia. So that was a government/private run facility that was specific for older people with mental health concerns. So we have in WA older persons older mental health service for older Australians, so people that are experiencing some sort of mental health issue attributed with lots of different things, including dementia and other behaviours, will sometimes go to these places for that specialised support, either from the community or be transferred from residential aged care and then back again. But this was specific for older people, and it was a mental health facility, but an aged care facility. Now, what was reported in the instances that had occurred was absolutely horrific. They had reports of abuse and neglect and preventable death. So they had a coroner's inquiry. If anyone wants to look that up after this, it's not very nice to read, but it's eye-opening, and you understand why the Commission then called the Royal Commission to look into the aged care safety. And the facility was eventually shut down in 2017. Unfortunately, from that point in time, there has been other instances of abuse and neglect, but we have what is called now the Serious Incident Response Scheme. But going back to November 2019, after the Royal Commission was launched, there was a prevalence study on the impact of sexual assault in aged care, and this was done by KPMG. Then 3 years later, the final report from the Royal Commission was released. What I can say to that was, in regards to sexual assault in residential aged care, when they released the final report, it was estimated that there were 50 episodes or 50 incidences of sexual assault in residential aged care per week. And that's when the government realised that that's what they were hearing, and there was no strong reporting mechanism in regards to reporting lots of different things, but particularly sexual assault in residential aged care. So following that report, the Serious Incident Response Scheme was established, and this initiative helps prevent and reduce incidences of abuse and neglect in residential aged care. There are 8 domains that they report about. There's absence from care, there's lots of different ones, but the one that was added to that was unlawful sexual conduct and sexual assault. And clearly much work needed to be done and still needs to be done, but that's when the Older Persons Advocacy Network in June 2021 launched the ReadytoListen Project. So that's been a year in the making, and it's all around the capacity building of residential aged care staff so they can recognise and help prevent any sexual assault in residential aged care, but if something does occur, to support the clients and the families. So when I speak to the ReadytoListen Project, firstly, I want to acknowledge that the ReadytoListen Project is funded by the Australian Government Department of Health and is led by the Older Persons Advocacy Network in partnership with Celebrate Ageing Limited and the Older Persons Network in New South Wales. I want to especially mention Dr. Catherine Barrett. So Dr. Catherine Barrett is an amazing human being. We here at Advocare have been working with her for 6 months, and she is the Director of Celebrate Ageing and also the Director of OPAL, which is the Older People and Sexual Rights Institute. And she has dedicated 25 years of her life to being an advocate for the sexual rights of older people, and is a leader in the prevention of sexual assault in older women. So she was the project lead for this project, and she's done incredible work, along with Yumi Lee, who is the CEO of the Older Women's Network in New South Wales. So the aim to build the skills and capacity of residential aged care service provider was to better respond and prevent sexual assault in residential aged care, and it delivers education and resources to support service providers through practical steps involved in creating change. So the desired outcome for everyone is that there is an understanding that the indicators of sexual assault, believing those who disclose sexual assault, and assess the impact on victims, survivors, providing support and protection to those residents. So these are the resources, and there's more that have just been released. So this gives you an idea of the work that's gone into the Ready to Listen project. So the map underpins all of the resources, and it goes to speak to the myths, the facts, and the practical strategies. Then they have the map, but the dementia map. So there's a lot of people that live in residential aged care with dementia. So it supports those that are specifically living with dementia. Then the trauma-informed framework and all the guides to reporting and the Charter of Sexual Rights and Responsibilities. So just very quickly, talking about now community perception. So we've spoken about residential aged care because that is what the Ready to Listen project is about. But just flipping that and speaking about community perceptions, because we all have perceived notions and perceptions. So just wanted to give you a visual about, you know, two young women in different stages of their life. That's Caitlin on the left, and she's in her mid-20s, and that's Margarita on the right, and she's in her mid-90s in this picture. So when we look at pictures, sometimes we come up with our own views, our own judgments, or our own perceptions. But when we look at both of these women, I can bet most people that are looking at Margarita don't think anything to do with sexuality. They don't. Younger people, it might still not come across your mind, but it would be more prevalent that people would. And the reason why we're having this conversation is that when we're talking about sexuality, we're talking about two completely different age demographics here. And when I speak to this, I'm not talking about particularly Caitlin or Margarita, but people of all different ages have that sexuality part still with them. You know, there's a lot of older people as well as younger people that are dating, that are still getting married, that have social media, that do online dating, that live different sort of alternative lifestyles around their sexuality as well. But a lot of people, and speaking to a lot of older people, they think that society views them as they get to an age, whatever that age may be, and it's just not part of who they are. For some people, it's a big part of who they are, and it has been their whole life. Other times it's not at all, and that's okay. But we need to remember that that is still part of who people are and how they identify. And some people do still have that need. When sexual assault occurs, then there is a myth that for a lot of people believe that the motivation behind sexual assault is lust and sexual attraction. And that couldn't be further from the truth. It is always about power and control and that sense of entitlement. And it's not always that opportunistic attack that people think. Caitlin on the left might be walking home from a party or a club, you know, at 2 o'clock in the morning, or trying to get a taxi to go home. And people would think that someone that age, living that sort of lifestyle, might be more vulnerable to sexual assault. And that's actually not the case. Any person can be the victim, survivor of sexual assault. So this is actually Margarita's story. So Margarita, I never had the pleasure of meeting her, but Dr. Catherine Barrett has captured her story beautifully on the Opal Institute. There is about a 20-minute clip about Margarita speaking about what her experiences are. So Margarita was a nurse. She served in the army. She got married. She had a life like all of us did. And she was living independently in her own home, which over in New South Wales, where she was, it was seen as rental service, which I found out was like a retirement village in WA. So she was living there and she was assaulted by the acting manager. She invited him into the home because he asked to come in, and she realised very quickly that she'd made a mistake. And whatever happened during that encounter was sexual assault. So when Margarita disclosed that she had been sexually assaulted by this acting manager to the permanent manager, she said that she was not believed. in her own words, she said that she knew straight away, just by her attitude change, the manager's attitude change, that that couldn't be the case, that this is our friend. We know this person. There's no way that that person would do that. So she was silenced for a little bit. And then she went to the day centre where she felt comfortable and she felt safe. And she disclosed the sexual assault again. And this time she was believed and action was put in place. So one of the staff members that she trusted, she disclosed the sexual assault to, then they got the manager involved, and then the floodgates open, and all the support that Margarita needed and people like Margarita needed were offered to her. She had the courage to report that to the police. She contacted the elder abuse helpline. She attended the counselling that was offered, and she connected with Dr. Catherine Barrett, who, as I explained before, is an advocate for preventing the sexual abuse of older women. So her fears, like many others who have been sexually assaulted, is that she would not be believed, that the assault was her fault, that the perpetrator would come back and assault her again, because obviously he knew where she lived and he knew that she was even more vulnerable than before. He said things during that assault that, you know, she was just an old woman and, you know, because of her view, you know, of her age, she would be viewed differently. That's how she thought about herself as well. And clearly, you know, someone that probably had the utmost faith in people, her trust was now broken in others for good reason. So the impacts that befell Margarita was that she no longer felt safe in her own home. And that's the one place that she should have felt safe, that she now slept on average 2 hours a night after the assault, which would have had a dreadful impact on her overall well-being. She slept with the lights on for over a year. She lost her appetite, her weight plummeted, and she felt utter disrespect, like she did not matter, and again, lost faith in human beings. But the triumphs are that Margarita found her voice and confided in those who were ready to listen. She gained friends to the end. She says in her story that before the assault, she said she had acquaintances, but then after the assault, she realised that she had friends and she gained new friends as well. Margarita decided that she would move into Nazareth House, which was a residential aged care facility. And the first night there, she slept for 7 hours solid. That would be welcome relief for her after years of not feeling safe and secure and rested. She found the courage to tell her story with the support of incredible people. She knew that she was now in a safe space and she was really well supported. And with her bravery, this assisted her perpetrator to plead guilty to 2 charges of sexual assault on 2 different women. Clearly, someone else was brave enough to speak up as well. He was convicted and sentenced to 6 months imprisonment, and which was unfortunately immediately suspended for 2 years, good behaviour bond. There are many Margaritas, and I believe that Margarita is the first person, the first older person to publicly talk about her story. And we know for a fact that Margarita is not the only older person that has suffered sexual abuse as an older person. And this is the reason why it's so important for us to have these conversations and to let people know that unfortunately it does happen, and we need to be able to open the door and let people know that it's okay to speak about what their experiences are. As we know, most victim survivors will not report the assault. 75% of people, I believe, know who their perpetrator are. They're married to them, they live with them, they're a family member, or they're known to them in some other way, shape or form. It is hidden in plain sight. And like I spoke to just before, that it is, I think the statistics were close to 30% is someone that you're married to or related to. So I will hand over to Serena now to speak about the signs of sexual assault and recovery recap.
So what's encouraging about Margarita's story is that it champions both her for having the courage to share her story, but it also really champions that individual who believed her, which triggered Margarita's journey to recovery. Unfortunately, that's not the case for many survivors who either don't feel they can disclose their experience, or they do disclose their experience and they're met with disbelief. We want to help you all understand some of the reasons why it's not common for people to disclose their experience of sexual abuse, and some of the ways that you can help people to encourage them to disclose their experiences. So what's really important to understand is that when something bad happens to someone, the brain and body's natural reaction is a trauma response, and that can look different for every single person. But regardless of what that response might look like, inevitably, we need to assume that there is trauma involved. In instances of sexual assault, there may be signs of physical abuse and physical trauma, but it's important to understand that there aren't always physical signs. In terms of the physical signs of trauma, some victims may experience STIs, UTIs, or incontinence. Others may experience heart palpitations, excessive sweating, breathing difficulties. Some people, like Margarita did, experience sleep and appetite disturbances. In some cases, there may be physical trauma present in the form of injuries, although it's important to note that this isn't always the case. And this is where it becomes a bit tricky, because unfortunately, physical trauma and injury is really what is looked at in terms of evidence for a criminal investigation. But just like I said, just because there isn't physical trauma or injury doesn't necessarily mean trauma hasn't occurred. So for many people in the aftermath of something traumatic, they can lose their sense of self. And this is where much of that apprehension about disclosing abuse originates from. It can be expressed in a number of ways, and again, it's different for everyone. Victim survivors can experience emotional upset that includes feelings of fear, sadness, guilt, and anger. People can experience any combination or all of them. Self-esteem can really be impacted in the aftermath of sexual assault, and this is the leading cause for why people feel like reaching out for help is not worthwhile, because they themselves no longer feel worthwhile. Intrusive thoughts, images, and dreams of the traumatic event can also make people feel fearful in the aftermath of an assault, and that can cause mistrust of others. Because of that ongoing sense of fear, victim survivors can feel uncomfortable in surroundings that used to feel safe to them, and they can withdraw and disengage from society, and that can become quite isolating. What's really tough about psychological trauma is that emotions are something that we feel, not necessarily something that we always express. Sometimes, if they are expressed, they can lead to diagnoses like post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety, and depression. But that's only when they're expressed quite strongly. When they're expressed, as they normally are, in quite a nuanced way, in the form of, very, very slight behavioural changes, very slight personality changes, it becomes difficult to sense. But what's really important as a community, as you and I here today, is to be able to identify these nuanced behaviours and to make sure that loved ones and neighbours are switched on to when something bad might have happened to someone. All of these kinds of behaviours that are listed can be warning signs that something bad has happened to someone, and they're so powerful that, as Shawnee said in the global research data, they have the power and the impact to increase an older person who's experienced sexual assault's risk of mortality. Being switched onto these signs can be as easy as checking in, and I know that with issues like sexual assault, sometimes it can seem like it's too much of a confronting topic to have that conversation, but it's important to know that you don't have to be a professional to just start the conversation and to just check in. So really, as loved ones and as a community, it's all about helping someone to recover. And when I say recover, I'm not talking about that clinical definition that sort of talks about mitigating risk and getting rid of symptoms. Honestly, that's really quite an unrealistic definition of recovery. When I talk about recovery and helping someone recover, I'm talking about the personal journey, like Margarita took, that anyone who's experienced trauma goes through to recover that sense of self and to learn to live comfortably with the trauma experience in their life. So really, it has nothing to do with getting rid of everything. It has everything to do with accommodating something. There's a fantastic quote that exists that goes along the lines of, a mind once stretched by new experience can never return to its old dimensions. I always think of that like when you learn something new at any stage in life, you grow from it and it's not possible to ungrow. And the same goes for trauma. When someone has experienced something traumatic, it isn't just forgotten, it shapes them and it changes the way that they experience their life. So like Margarita, when someone no longer feels safe in the space that they occupy, recovery is about engaging with and helping them regain that sense of safety, regaining a sense of worth, and helping the person discover that there is space for them to live, to be valued, and be safe while they're experiencing trauma. While recovery has a very personal definition and it's different for everybody, it is a journey that requires support, and that's something that is referred to as recovery capital. So recovery capital refers to the internal and external assets that a person has, both within themselves and around them, to help them feel like they can regain that sense of safety and that sense of self-worth. For Margarita, her first bit of recovery capital was herself, the fact that she had the courage to speak up about her experience. That second bit of recovery capital for her was that person who believed her. That was really key. And then beyond that, all of the services and supports that she received to regain her sense of safety and achieve those triumphs are also considered recovery capital. So if people can access support, if they are heard and believed, and if they can access a space where they can talk about their experiences and be met with unconditional positive regard, they're far more likely to positively recover. And all of you, like the person who believed Margarita and supported Margarita, have the power to be that recovery capital. Now, like I've explained, recovery capital can exist for people on a number of levels. It can be found in the individual, like Margarita. It can be found in their close network of friends and family, the support person that Margarita had, and then also in their community, the services that were available to her, and even in the society in terms of the attitudes that exist. For the purpose of today, we're really interrogating what we can do on that individual and community level to better support recovery after sexual assault. But what I'm going to do is explain it as a holistic community of recovery, because sometimes it's easy to think, you know, I'm one person, how much impact can I really make? And I'm going to show you, hopefully, just how much of an impact you can make as an individual on that larger level. So we know that as people age, unfortunately, we may lose some of our personal assets, our mobility, our cognition, even personal assets like our home and our more tangible assets. But just because we lose some of those tangible assets does not mean we have to lose our sense of self-determination. And we can all support people to feel, like Margarita did, that they still have autonomy in their lives. And a lot of that comes down to the support of family and friends. As Margarita's story showed us, there was tremendous resilient power in being a loved one who believes, supports, and is ready to assist someone who's experienced sexual assault. Please know that just by attending or logging in today and taking away some of the practical strategies that we're about to show you to believe, support, and assist people, you're already equipped to be someone's recovery capital. Tomorrow, we're presenting similar to this, but to aged care staff and providers. And there we're really going to tackle that middle section about community and organisations to support and encourage services and organisations to provide the right level of care and support and to embed trauma-informed practice in their policy. Like Shawnee said, there's also peak bodies and projects like Open and Ready to Listen that, because of Margarita's story, are working on a higher level to push for more services to be available for more people to access. If anyone tuning in today has access to or is involved in a provider organisation in any way, you can also contribute on this level by holding them accountable for having a culture and a policy that supports people experiencing sexual assault, and so that they respond appropriately. By creating more services and improving the existing services that we have, we can collectively contribute to creating contributing more recovery capital for victim survivors on that community level. And our hope is that it will trickle. I know trickling doesn't happen upwards, but it will trickle upwards in this model onto that society level. So Unfortunately, we know that public attitudes like ageism, sexism, and ableism exist and are very prevalent and damaging in Australia. These attitudes are reflected in our policy and legislation, and that feeds back down into how organisations are run and into how individuals see and treat themselves and others. If we can improve the way that we respond as individuals, and if we can get the community and organisations on board to do the same, we can hopefully experience a shift in those public attitudes. And that can be reflected in public policy that is much more responsive and protective of people who experience sexual assault. So really, it does all start with you, and it does all start with us here today. Ultimately, like I said, this is all about establishing and fostering what we call a community of recovery, where families, groups, communities, and society shows collective accountability and allyship for people experiencing trauma, especially those who are the older members of our society. So now that you know just how valuable you are as an individual to make a difference, we're really keen to equip you with some practical strategies that you can take away from today to help you support someone who's potentially experienced sexual assault. So we've broken these down into some practice strategies, which are some things that you can enact, and some more verbal strategies, things that you can say and things that you can ask. So the first practice strategy is something that is called unconditional positive regard. And that has to do with when you enter a conversation with someone, being prepared that no matter what they say, no matter what they share with you, you will meet them with support and you will meet them with a positive attitude. Active listening is about showing that you're listening. Listening is something that we do, but not something we necessarily show. So you can actively listen by using positive body language. You can rephrase the use of survivors' words and show your understanding. It's really important to mirror the words that the victim survivor uses, and also ask open-ended questions. And that's really important because we need to help people feel like they're in control of their narrative. It's incredibly empowering to feel like you're in control of your own story in situations where you feel like you've lost all of your control. Patience is incredibly important because it's necessary to understand that someone who's experienced sexual assault is still trying to figure out what's happened to them. Majority of the case, as they're sharing it with someone, you might be the first person they've shared it with, the first person they've expressed it with. So helping them to make sense of it by being patient and also by acknowledging and validating what they say. This all kind of comes together to create what we call a holding space. So think about how you feel when something bad might have happened and someone gives you a really big warm hug. Creating that kind of atmosphere in the space, in the room, through your sense of self can really encourage people to feel safe in their environment. And that is also relevant in terms of trauma-informed responses. Again, ensuring that people feel safe while you're talking to them. I've included in the slide here, being aware of touch is really important when someone might have experienced sexual assault. Sometimes it's our instinct to, put a hand on someone's knee, give them a hug. But if someone's experienced something where they've been touched without giving consent, and that's traumatizing, you can re-traumatize them just by trying to give them a supportive hug. And also knowing services you can refer the survivor to. Like I said, we aren't professionals, and sometimes people do need professional help and support. And no matter what you do, no matter what you say or help someone with, make sure that you keep respect and dignity for that person in the forefront of your response at all times.
Thank you, Serena, very much. So just going the practical things that you can say or ask, because it's hard to have that conversation. We say a million times a day, how are you? And people will say, yeah, I'm fine. Yeah, I'm good. No matter what's going on in their life. And they really don't elaborate more than that. But asking someone like, how are you really? How are you going? Sometimes is enough for someone to say, look, okay, that person's interested. I might divulge how I'm feeling or what's happening to me. Another thing is you don't seem like your usual self. Has something happened to make you feel this way? Are you okay? Because if you're letting someone know that you notice a difference in them, then that might be another way that they will open up, because they're thinking, oh, this is obviously affecting me more than I think it is. I'm not hiding it as well as I might want to. And a burden shared is a burden halved as well. I care about you. I believe you. It's not your fault. Margarita's key messages were to older women, it's not their fault, and that there are support services that can support them. Thank you for sharing that with me. That's validating for the older person, saying that this is important, and thank you for sharing it with me. I can hear that this is really hard for you. Going back to when Serena said active listening, if you're saying to someone that you can hear that this is hard for them, then you obviously have heard what they've said. You've listened, but you've heard exactly what their message is. Offering, what do you need? What can I do for you? And encourage that continued connection and ongoing support by saying, I'm here for you, because sometimes it might take 1, 2, 3, 4, 10 conversations, little bits of conversation for that person to fully disclose or feel comfortable talking about what their experiences might have been. These are some useful resources. The Sexual Assault Resource Centre is the only one that I know in WA that will offer a crisis service. So they are located in Perth, providing crisis services to people who have experienced a recent sexual assault in the last 2 weeks, and counselling for sexual assault or abuse recently experienced or in the past as well. We will make this information available to you all, but these are just some of the useful resources. If we go down to the Centre for Women's Safety and Wellbeing site, that has lots of different organisations that will be able to support someone who has experienced sexual assault. And there's a lot of numbers in the regional and remote areas as well, which is fantastic. The last thing that I want to share with you before we wrap up for today is the power of empathy. When we have been researching this topic and we're talking about elder abuse in general, how many times have you heard someone go through a hard situation, abuse related or not, and people say, I don't want someone to feel sorry for me. I don't want that. Well, that obviously is more sympathy than empathy. So I delved into a bit of what empathy is. And empathy fuels connection, while sympathy drives disconnection. And the fundamental qualities of empathy are that perspective taking, the ability to see this perspective of another person or recognise their perspective as their truth. And it's important to do this in regards to sexual assault, because you're believing them. Their perspective is their truth. So looking at it from their point of view. Staying out of judgment. Avoid judgments based on your own personal and moral standards. There's a lot of people, maybe not with older people, but younger people, that have a certain judgment around why sexual assault happens. The old sayings is, she was drunk, or look what she was wearing, or, she had revealing clothes. That is obviously judgment. So avoiding judgment based on what you might think personally, and recognise emotion in the other people, and then communicating that. That goes back to the active listening, letting them know that you're, aware of what they're going through, and you're there to sit with them if that is beneficial to them. So in the face of difficult conversations, something we try to do is make things better. However, a single response, usually it will start the conversation and it might go to help a person feel better, but it is limited. What can facilitate that healing is that connection you feel with another person. And when I was doing the research for empathy, the best way to remember the difference is empathy is feeling with people and sympathy is feeling for people. So on that note, I would like to thank everyone here in the theaterette and everyone at home for tuning in. And as Serena has already mentioned, that there will be a Q&A panel session taking place next Wednesday, the 22nd of June. So after today's session and the 2 sessions that are directed at aged care providers tomorrow, we are welcoming anyone to come back to submit. We're going to be here in person in the theaterette to come back and join that Q&A. I think Taryn's going to speak to the panellists in a minute. And a lot of people, when they're faced with lots of information that we've given you today, don't necessarily have a question at the time, but they'll go away, digest the information and think about things that they want to know or they want answered. Please know that that's a possibility. So if you don't want to ask a question today, you've got a whole week to think about something that you might want to raise. And there's going to be plenty of other subject matter experts on our panel as well. But if you want to ask a question today, please feel free. Can I hand over to you, Taryn?
Sure, thank you. We've just had a couple of questions come through on the Q&A for Zoom. Do you want to answer a couple of questions?
Yes.
We're a bit short of time, so we'll go to a couple of shorter ones. If someone I know is assaulted, how can Advocare assist?
In the first instance, we will have a conversation with the person about what they would like to do about the situation. We will provide them with options and resources and useful contact numbers, and we will let them know that they are not alone and we are here to listen to them first and foremost and walk with them step by step to help them understand what they have at their fingertips.
Awesome. And will the slides be available later?
Absolutely, they will. All the slides will be available.
Okay, and we'll do a final question. What can I do if my loved one is showing signs but does not want to talk about it?
As Serena, do you want to answer this about the holding space? Oh, I might flick this to Serena because she's fantastic at speaking about the holding space.
So it's natural that sometimes people don't want to talk about it. They need a little bit of extra time to think about it, to process it themselves. Sometimes checking in is not always about getting answers. Sometimes it's just about knowing that the support is there, offering the support. And yes, like Shawnee said, that holding space, creating that supportive space that people know that when they're ready in their own time, that they can speak to a loved one or a service that is available.
Thank you, guys. Okay, so I just want to wrap up and reiterate, like Shawnee has already said, that questions not answered today will be put in a summary and we'll answer by email. We'll also answer some of those questions on the 22nd of June for the Ready to Listen Q&A follow-up forum. Some of our special panelists include people from Seniors' Rights Legal Aid, Curtin University, Place who are care leavers, the Sexual Assault Resource Centre, and Dr. Catherine Barrett. So thank you for joining us all today. There is morning tea outside the foyer, and we'll leave it at that. Thank you.